Right. Well, first of all, I thank you for talking with me, Senator Cruz. I write a lot about Common Core, and you've mentioned Common Core just a number of times in your speeches, and you talk about repealing Common Core. However, with Common Core actually being decided at the state level, what is it that the federal government can actually do to address the problem?
Well, the federal government should stop mandating it and using race to the top funds to force states to adopt Common Core. What the Obama administration has done is use the coercive power of federal money to get states to go down this road, and they're also trying to intrude federal oversight into the substantive standards. I think the federal government has no business whatsoever being involved in the curriculum that is taught in schools. We need to repeal Common Core altogether. I'm categorically opposed to it, and I think education should be at the state level, or even better at the local level. And the advantage of having it at the local level is it gives parents a direct control over the education of our kids. Education is too important to be governed by some distant bureaucrat in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
All of us as parents need to have direct input into what our kids are taught.
Okay. With Senate right now, I believe the Health Committee passed the ESEA reauthorization out. What's your position on that current bill? Have you had a chance to read it? I know it's probably...
It's just coming out of committee, so I'm still studying the details of the particular bill, but I believe we should be reducing, or even better, eliminating the strings and mandates that are coming from the federal government with regard to education. Mm-hmm. And we should be expanding school choice. We should be empowering parents and children to choose the best education for their families. And I am a passionate advocate of school choice. I think school choice is the civil rights issue of the 21st century, that every child has a right to a quality education regardless of race or ethnicity or wealth or zip code. And so I've filed legislation along with Senator Mike Lee to allow the federal money that is currently going to education to follow the child, to be portable with the child, so that you can expand options so kids can have better education and in greater hope and futures.
So similar to like an education savings account?
Different from an education savings account, although I support that as well. I support anything and everything that gives more choice to parents and children and expands their options in education.
Okay. You recently, I believe it was you, I'm sorry, I'm mixing you up with somebody else, but Congressman King, I'll bring him up. He filed a bill that would restrict the Supreme Court or eliminate their jurisdiction over marriage. You advocated something similar, did you not?
Well, I filed a bill to do the same thing. So Steve King is a good friend. He and I agree on a great many issues. And this week I filed two different pieces of legislation. One was a constitutional amendment that would protect the authority of the states to define marriage as the union of one man and one woman, which is what the law has been for the entire history of our country. From the day the Constitution was ratified, marriage has been a question for the states, and it is only in the last couple of years that you've seen the federal government and unelected federal judges launching an assault on marriage. The second piece of legislation I filed, very similar to Steve King's legislation, is legislation that would strip the federal courts of jurisdiction over lawsuits seeking to tear down traditional marriage. The Constitution explicitly gives Congress the power to restrict the jurisdiction of the federal courts, and that's what the legislation is that I filed.
Okay. Now let's talk about Iran.
Yeah.
How would a President Cruz handle Iran?
Well, the current Iran deal that President Obama has negotiated is a terrible, terrible deal. I think the single greatest national security threat facing America is the threat of a nuclear Iran. And this deal only accelerates Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. The Obama-Iran deal allows Iran to keep thousands upon thousands of centrifuges, to keep enriching uranium, to keep their enriched uranium, to keep developing their ICBM program, which the only purpose of that program is to carry a nuclear weapon to the United States of America and to attack us. It doesn't make any sense. In the Senate, I intend to do everything possible to kill a bad Iranian deal. And if Senate Democrats do what they have been doing, if they stand in party line unison with the president to prevent the Senate from acting, then that means the next president in January 2017, when he or she takes office, is likely to receive a world with Iran on the cusp of having nuclear weapons. And any president suitable to be commander-in-chief should be prepared to on January 20th, 2017, repudiate a bad Iran deal that undermines American national security and to do everything necessary to ensure that under no circumstances whatsoever, Iran, a nation run by theocratic Islamic zealots who have pledged to annihilate Israel and who pledge death to America, under no circumstances should those religious zealots be allowed to have nuclear weapons that could murder millions of Americans or millions of our allies.
Right. Is there a circumstance where you would see the necessity of putting boots back on the ground in that area, or increasing troops back in that region?
Ideally, we should respond to Iran using sanctions. I filed my own sanctions legislation that would immediately reimpose sanctions. It would strengthen those sanctions to make them even more crippling. With oil prices having fallen, the Iranian economy is hurting right now, and the Obama administration is trying to step in and give them billions upon billions of dollars as a lifeline. We ought to be making it even more punishing. And then the legislation I filed lays out a clear path for Iran to lift the sanctions. Number one, they must disassemble all 19,000 centrifuges that they have. Number two, they must hand over every pound of enriched uranium. Number three, they must shut down their ICBM program. Okay. And number four, they must cease being the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. What is ironic is that the weakness and appeasement of the Obama administration only increases the chance of military conflict. History teaches that weakness is provocative and it invites aggression by bad actors. I believe in peace through strength. And it's worth noting, foreign policy is one of the areas that can change most quickly.
Yes.
In January 1981, this same nation, Iran, released our hostages the day Ronald Reagan was sworn in. And it was because they understood that there was a new commander-in-chief who was credible and meant what he said. And I am looking forward, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected president in January 2017, bringing that same seriousness of purpose and credibility so that Iran will know they will either shut down their nuclear program or we will shut it down for them.
So what does that policy direction look like in terms of Russia and North Korea and China?
Well, with each of them, what we've seen over the last 6 years is the Obama-Clinton foreign policy of leading from behind is a manifest disaster. It doesn't work. What we've seen right now is our friends and allies, they don't trust us. And our enemies, they don't fear us. When I travel abroad, I was in Munich just a couple of months ago at a defense conference with heads of state and defense ministers and foreign ministers from countries all over the world. Our allies will pull you aside. They'll grab you by the shoulder. They look at you and they say, where is America? The world is more dangerous without America in it. We need America back. There is a vacuum because the Obama-Clinton foreign policy has retreated from the world and projected weakness. And at the same time, for the next 20 months, I think we are in a state of nature. I think it's like Lord of the Flies, where every bad actor is limited only by the limits of their own strength, is limited only by their ability to seize more land, to intimidate or oppress their neighbors, because they've taken the measure of the man, President Obama's commander-in-chief, and they've determined there is zero credible threat from this president. That needs to change. And when dealing with, for example, Russia, so that was the first part of your question, Putin's not a complicated guy. Putin is basically a KGB thug. He has stated very candidly that he thinks the greatest geopolitical disaster of modern times is the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And accordingly, what he's trying to do is reassemble as much of the Soviet Union as possible. His aggression towards Ukraine is the direct consequence of President Obama's weakness. Now, what should we have done differently? Well, when the people of Ukraine were standing in the Maidan Square, and I've been in the Maidan Square with a high school girl who was protesting there, who showed me the bullet marks where her friends, other teenagers, were gunned down by the army. The president should have spoken out for freedom. The words of the commander-in-chief in support of freedom have power of the bully pulpit. And if Putin had acted, had gone in and invaded Ukraine, two things we should have done immediately. Number one, we should have immediately installed the anti-ballistic missile batteries that were scheduled to go into the Czech Republic and Poland. President Obama and Hillary Clinton canceled that in 2009. in an effort to appease Putin, that appeasement didn't work.
Right.
And secondly, Putin uses energy to blackmail Ukraine and much of Europe. At the time of the invasion, there were 22 applications pending to export liquid natural gas. The president should have immediately approved every single one of them. That would have helped the people of Ukraine and Europe stand free of Russian aggression. It would have hit Putin where it counts in the pocketbook, and it would have produced jobs and economic growth back home. That is an example of peace through strength, of America leading again.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen for the next 20 months, but I'm confident in January 2017, we're going to see a new president and hopefully a president who restores America's leadership in the world.
I may be out of time, but I just have one last question. You've been criticized a little, about missing the Loretta Lynch confirmation vote. You're not the only one who's going to have to deal with this on the campaign trail. How are you going to balance your
Right.
current role
Right.
with running for president?
Right. Well, with regard to Loretta Lynch, I have led the opposition to Loretta Lynch from day one. The Senate Judiciary Committee, I took the lead asking vigorous questions where she laid out her refusal to impose any meaningful limits on President Obama's authority, her refusal to acknowledge or follow the Constitution or rule of law. I asked her if she would differ from Eric Holder, the most partisan attorney general we've ever seen. She refused to describe any way she would differ from Holder. I voted against her in committee. I called publicly for Republican leadership to halt her confirmation. Sadly, Republican leadership could have stopped this confirmation. I wrote an op-ed calling for it. I went publicly over and over again calling for leadership not to confirm an attorney general who tells the Senate that she will disregard the law and impose no limits on the president's authority. And then this week, I flew back to Washington to vote against her on cloture. Cloture was the vote that mattered. It was the 60-vote threshold where if Republicans had simply stood together, she would not have been confirmed. Unfortunately, Republican leadership made the decision that they wanted to allow her to be confirmed. And I gave a long and passionate speech on the Senate floor, pointing out that there are a lot of people across this country frustrated. We worked very hard in 2014 to elect a new Republican majority. And yet this Republican majority in the Senate is confirming the exact same Attorney General that Harry Reid, the Democrats, would have confirmed. Now, it's true, the final vote, which was on the confirmation vote at the end of the day, I was not there because I had to fly back for a campaign event. But the reality is that vote was a done deal. The fight had been the cloture vote. And there is no doubt to any observer that I had led the fight to stop her. And on the question of how you balance both, I've got a job to do in the Senate representing 27 million Texans. But I'll tell you, Texans are also calling on me to stand up and fight to turn this country around. And I have to say, the energy and enthusiasm we have seen in the months since we launched this presidential campaign has been breathtaking. We have seen tens of thousands of volunteers from all over the country going to tedcruz.org, signing up to volunteer for the campaign. In the first week of the campaign, we had over 51,000 contributions come online from all 50 states. As people came to tedcruz.org, they gave over $4 million. 95% of those contributions were $100 or less. And the reason is simple. People realize the path we're on is not working. They want to change the direction of this country. And I think they're looking for someone who's going to tell them the truth and do what he said he would do.
Great. Thank you so much.